Mr. Blue Rose trying to come at you with a Sunday morning story. I sure don't have much time to make these stories, and I don't have any time to make the videos, so I threw up that thing last week, Brave New World Part 1. Absolutely nobody liked it. I thought it was very entertaining, but since it got absolutely no response, I'm not going to bother with Part 2. You can find it yourself if you're interested. And I've been complained on for telling my family stories. You don't talk about something else, quit talking about your family. You know, what am I going to talk about then? I got George Jones stories I guess I can talk about. I got all kinds of stuff. I'll talk about George Jones' story. I'll talk about George Jones's evil band. I'm not saying his whole band was evil. I'm not saying his band was evil at all. It's just a good title. But maybe there were some members in there that were evil, and I'll get to that part as I go. I'll try not to go too long here. But I remember when I started working for George Jones, it was a blessing to me. It was literally a blessing. I got to drive the tractor trailer. That's how I got my foot in the door. I'd never drove a tractor trailer in my life. I'd never even been in a tractor trailer. And I never had a driver's license, a CDL, the entire time I was the driver as I drove George Jones's tractor trailer. And I worked my way up to driving George Jones's bus by some miracle. I never had a license. Nobody ever asked me for a license. I don't think they would ever thought about it. They just assumed I had a license. But when I started driving the truck, which belonged to Jim Owen Audio, and they were all on drugs. They were all on cocaine all the time. So they just didn't care. I thought, these fuckers are crazy, because I can't even stop this truck. Nobody told me how to stop it. I could change gears going up, but I couldn't change them going down because nobody told me to hold a steady RPM and find the sweet spot and change gears. They said, rev it up. Just rev it up and downshift. Okay, well, I'd go, you know, and then I'd be rolling down the road out of gear, which is called Georgia Overdrive, I think. So I went all the way to Canada on my first gig. I couldn't gear that truck down. So I'm just telling you how crazy these people were, how drugged up. This was the sound company. I got in with the sound company. And you didn't even see them. They just went to, there wasn't no GPS. There wasn't none of that crap. And I figured it out and drove, and I went the wrong way, which turned out to be the right way, and the band went the other way, and they got trapped under a low bridge. So all of a sudden I was in good with George. They thought I was lucky. So they started taking a liking to me. Anyway, it was a tough job. I would drive. I remember when I started driving, I'd get so tired, I'd think, I'm not going to make this. I'm not going to make it. This is impossible. And there was no relief. The guy who owned the truck stayed in back and stayed high all the time and drunk. And he never would relieve me, and I had to write the logbooks out that both of us had driven, because that was the law, but it had only been me driving. So one time at the truck stop, he got me to get some kind of pills. I got some kind of pills at the truck stop and took a bunch of those pills and stayed awake for a long time. It just made me sick. I never took those pills again. And then I remember later on he told me, go over to George's bus and ask Pee-wee for a driving incentive, okay? And I had to think about that for a minute. Driving incentive, okay? And apparently he was talking about cocaine. And there was no way I was going over to George Jones's bus and asking for cocaine. George Jones was my hero, and still is. He was my hero. I was so lucky to even be in the presence of him doing anything. So why would I go over there and ask for cocaine? I didn't even do cocaine. I never went and asked. I never took one flake of it the whole time I drove. Eventually I built up a huge tolerance to where I could drive 4 or 5 days with no sleep. And I could do it. And I got used to it. And I would still sometimes fade out. right at twilight is when it would get me. Right between, dark and morning, right at twilight when the white line fever would get you, and you'd just start falling out and just praying to God to stay awake, let me stay awake. And I would smoke cigarette after cigarette and just let them burn down to my fingers, just keep them burning all the time to stay awake, because there was no relief driver. And you didn't have any time. There was no GPS. You had an atlas. And you had an address. You just had an address, a venue written down, and you'd have to find this place. There was nobody to tell you. You just have to find it when you got to town by asking some waitress at Waffle House or a filling station or somebody at a store, whatever it took. And there were many times I dozed off at the wheel, and it'd be terrifying when I wake up. It'd scare me to death. I'd wake up driving this tractor trailer at 80 miles an hour or more. Because we flew all the time in the big hole, was what he called it, which was 15th gear. And you had to be running at least 75 miles an hour to keep from bogging down in the big hole. So we would be averaging between 75 to 112, 115 miles an hour sometime to get ahead of the Joneses. That's what it took. There was 3 of us in the truck, me and Jim Owen and Tim Malier. Tim Malier claimed he couldn't drive, but he could drive because he stayed up all night one night teaching me to gear down finally, and I learned how to gear down that night all the way from Canada to Cincinnati Gardens, which was an impossible run. You had to be there in the morning. It was impossible, but we made it anyway because I ran over 115 miles an hour almost all the way there. So we made it and got to town. Then you had to find the venue, and that was the tough part, but we still made it. What I'm saying is, it's a hard life driving like that, and it's dangerous, and you're lucky if you survive it. I remember waking up one time, I think I was on 75 South at Ringgold, Georgia, right at twilight, always twilight, and I heard a massive horn blow, and the truck beside me blew the horn, or I would have just veered right into him. Nobody cared. Like I said, these fuckers were crazy. I thought they were fucking crazy. Maybe I should get some cocaine. But I'm not asking George Jones, bus driver, for cocaine. I don't want any cocaine. Like I say, I built up a tolerance. What I'm trying to get to, I need to make this quick. There was another guy named Walter Ferguson, and he was the bus driver for the band. He drove the band all the time. I don't think he had a relief driver either. Maybe the owner, Bobby Burkhead, might take over for a couple hours sometime. Maybe. But Walter drove all the time, non-stop. And he was a Christian. This is where I'm getting to the evil band part. I remember one night we're headed to Canada. We're driving through Chicago or something. We did a gig somewhere. We're coming through Chicago. I'm behind him in the tractor trailer, and he's in the band bus. And some woman comes down the wrong side of the expressway and just barely misses us both. And I got on, Walter got on the CB and said, "You see that?" And I said, "Yeah." And that's all there was to it. Those people, those spoiled brat band members in that band, they never knew how close they came so many times to their death. There wasn't no point in telling them, some bitch coming down the wrong side expressway. Going the wrong way is what I'm saying. And that kind of stuff happened all the time. They were so spoiled. They'd lay in their little bunks back there and read their books or with their Walkmans on, just spoiled, rotten brats. Not all of them, but some. Anyway, when we would go to Canada, the first time I went to Canada, I drove the truck all through Canada. I'd never been to Canada. I had no way of knowing where I was. I'm just flying through Canada, just trying to stay away and get to wherever it is I'm going. First thing I remember about that, I was afraid I was going to run over George because I had to follow his bus at one time. And I just knew I was going to be the son of a bitch that run over George Jones, and that was going to be my fate in life. Luckily, it didn't happen. I had to follow the back of his bus. He had this huge sign, George Jones Country Gold, on the back, dog food. And I just stayed focused on that because I couldn't shift real well. But anyway, I remember when I wasn't following at one point. I'm just flying through Canada. I come over a hill after all this just mundane driving and driving. All of a sudden there's Thunder Bay. It's like Moses had just seen the sea part or something. I mean, you didn't know it was coming. You come over here and there's Thunder Bay. What a change in scenery. I remember that moment. I'm just saying that. But when the next time we went to Canada, I went on the band bus. For some reason, I can't remember. I'd worked my way up. I wasn't driving the truck no more. So that was great. But I was on the bus, the band bus, and Walter was a Christian, and before we would go into Canada, he would pull the bus over and have a group prayer. He would literally stop and come out there and try to get everybody to join hands, and he'd say a prayer, "Oh Lord, bless this bus, protect this bus," and all these things that I thought was a great idea. I thought, wow, how lucky they are to have somebody do that. And what shocked me was there was so many complaints from band members that he had no right to do that, to make us pray and put us through that. And I thought, what a bunch of dumbasses, because I remember going down, people coming down the wrong side of the road and driving in blizzards and snowstorms and through the Mississippi River when it's flooded, and rain and fog so thick you couldn't even see where you were. And all these things as they laid back there in their little bunks with their Walkman and their little magazines. How spoiled they were. But that was the first inkling I got of people that didn't believe in God. I thought everybody really believed in God. They just maybe didn't do the right thing or whatever. But they all surely believed. But there were people in that band that didn't believe. I'm not saying all of them. But there were plenty in there who complained about it. And there was enough of them complained to get him fired from his job driving the bus. And they stuck him off in the t-shirt truck by himself, where he could just pray for his own self and those t-shirts to make it safely. And that's all I got to say. It's just, if you believe in God, you're going to catch some hell. But you're also going to have a lot of blessings like I have. I had a lot of blessings, and I've caught a lot of hell. And I just felt lucky that that guy would get up and say a prayer to protect this bus headed through these places where we don't know where we are, and keep us all safe, Lord. But there were plenty of band members that didn't like that and knocked him down to the t-shirt truck. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Nothing funny. If you think these stories are worth telling, let me know it. If I don't see some comments, I'm damn sure not going to get on here and waste my time doing this, because I'm busy. I got all kinds of things going on. I got all kinds of problems I won't get into that I have to deal with on a daily basis. And all I can say is keep a good thought and don't get caught not believing in God. 10-4.